across the crowded ways of life, where sound the cries of race and clan, above the noise of selfish strife.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this interview that we're having today with Deborah Carlton Loftis. My name is Mike McMahon. I'm the Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada, and it's my pleasure to be talking to Deb today. She's one of my predecessors and was the Executive Director of the Hymn Society from 2009 until 2017. Before that, she was a professor of church music at Baptist Theological Seminary in Richmond, Virginia, and she has served in churches as music minister and associate pastor at churches in Kentucky and Alabama. And you're going to find out actually a lot more about Deb as we go through our conversations today. It's great to have all of you here. I see some of the Richmond mafia is logged in, along with people from all over the place, and many of you who have worked with Deb closely over the years. So we certainly invite you to take part in the conversation through the chat and also through the question and answer feature. And I see that, we've got lots of hellos already from people in Evanston and Ohio and not to mention Richmond. So anyway, hello, Deb. It's good to be with you today.
Hi, Mike. I'm glad to be here. As Paul Richardson has already reminded us, this is running in opposition to the House committee. So I'm sure people are having a terrible time deciding how they should spend this hour.
Well, apparently not everyone. So we're glad for those who are with us today. Well, I'd like to start at the beginning, if you don't mind. I'd love to hear a little bit about your own family background and growing up, and how it came to be that you got interested in things like church music and ministry.
Well, one of the things that shaped me was that my parents and I used to sit around the piano and sing hymns. My mother had studied piano as a child, but didn't have a huge repertoire. She could play hymns. And so we would sit and sing, and I enjoyed that a lot. My mom and dad, although not professionally trained musicians, sang duets in church, mostly in the time before I was born, but they would sing things like "'Neath the Old Olive Trees," way back from the Broadman hymnal. And I enjoyed listening to them sing, and then I would join in when I could. And then we sang things that I knew. And I think that that experience was an important part of my being comfortable around hymns as a small child, being able to read the hymns out of the hymnal and sing with mom and dad. I grew up Southern Baptist in a suburban Southern Baptist congregation in Richmond. And it was in the time when Southern Baptists were really focused on building music programs, graded choir programs, and really a strong emphasis on music education in the church. And so I came up through graded choirs, singing in the junior choir is probably my earliest memory. And as I was thinking about these matters, it occurred to me that the earliest hymn that I remember singing in church was in junior choir. I'm sure I sang other things, but they didn't stick in my head. The junior choir sang "Thy Word is Like a Garden, Lord," to the tune Clonmel. And I think that the imagery of that hymn for a small child was very vivid. It sparked my imagination, and I really loved Clonmel. So I remember singing that with great enthusiasm. The first solo that I was supposed to sing when I was about 11 or 12 was "Where Cross the Crowded Ways of Life."
Mm.
I rehearsed it a long time and worked very hard on it, and then didn't get to sing it because in the service that evening, the pastor skipped right over the place where I was supposed to sing and went on with the next part of the service. So I didn't know whether to be upset that I didn't get to sing or relieved that I didn't have to sing. But that hymn also stands out in my memory as an important childhood experience. But truly, I cannot remember ever not singing. It was just a part of my life. And when I got to be a teenager, I was involved with helping the smaller children in our congregation with music. In particular, there was a group, this will bring a smile to some old Baptist faces. I led music for the Sunbeams. Those were the preschool kids in a mission program. So with my guitar, I felt like I could go and sing anywhere, sing anything. The guitar was sort of my mantle of protection. And there was a summer that I worked in one of the Richmond missions centers down in the downtown area of Richmond. And I went and led singing with children from about 5 to 12 or 13. And we would sit around and sing fun songs, folk songs, but also some religious songs and choruses. And I think during that period, I was developing a sense of my call to ministry, which I expected would be with youth and children, but didn't really nail it down as being music until later.
Right. So did you continue to do music in college, or?
I did not. I studied piano for part of my high school years until my teacher thought I should practice 2 hours a day. And I thought that was a little extreme. And besides, I thought I was going to be a folk singer anyway, and I didn't really need to play the piano that well. So I put out of my mind being a music major because I thought they would require so many hours of practice. So I majored in history and found out that I could sit and read history 8 hours a day. So I guess you just pick what you want to spend your time with. But no, I didn't continue a formal study of music until I got to seminary. I thought I was going to go and study religious education and work with youth and children. My husband, John Loftis, was going to do religious education and work with adults. We thought we'd make a great team. But on the way to seminary, I had a friend challenge me. I had fussed with her for not practicing the organ enough. She was an organ major at Furman. And she whirled around on me and said, "You sing pretty well. What are you going to do about that?" So I promised her I would talk to the dean in the School of Music about taking voice lessons. So with some trepidation, went to see the dean, Forrest Heron. And somehow, and I still haven't figured this out to this day, somehow by the time I left his office, I had transferred from the School of Religious Education to the School of Church Music. And I couldn't explain it to John. I couldn't explain it to anybody except that it seemed like the right thing to do. So I proceeded to cram a 2-year Master of Church Music degree into 4 years full-time with all of the makeup work that I had to do. So that's where I really got into congregational singing as part of my studies. And of course, Hugh McElrath was a big part of that.
Yeah. So at seminary, you sort of established some relationships that have been influential through your whole life. Huh?
So true. So true. Dear Hugh McElrath, on the first day of hymnology class, passed around membership brochures to the student chapter of the Hymn Society that was at Southern, and then also to the national organization, and made it very clear that he thought all serious students would become members. So, of course, we dutifully filled out our cards. For a number of us, that first orientation perhaps took. And I got involved with the student chapter of the Hymn Society, and I won't name names, but there are an awful lot of folks who are still around the Hymn Society who participated in those programs, and
some of them are watching. Some of them are on.
Some of them are watching,
right?
And I know better than to tell too many stories because they have stories on me. So we'll just be nice. But that in the student chapter, that's where I met Brian Wren. He came in the early 80s, and he was, I'm sure, doing other things, but Hugh McElrath got him to come to Louisville, and he just blew everybody's socks off just listening to him and hearing his story and hearing about his hymns and singing them. Yeah, that was an amazing moment.
That's a powerful experience. I mean, the edginess of his hymns had to be challenging, huh?
It was. And when I think about the time that it had to be in the very early 80s. And he was talking about South Africa and apartheid in his hymnody and using feminine imagery for God. And these were all brand new ideas to me. The very idea that you could put the word Soweto in a hymn was really just made me stop in my tracks and think, well, what else could we put in hymnody? Everything that's going on in our world, can we write specifically about that? And so it was really a stretching experience for me to talk with him and listen to what he had to share with us. Really shaped my whole perspective on what congregational singing could do.
Yeah. So you went on to be ordained, right? And so you talk a little bit about your call to ministry and all that.
Well, I've often described this as God's call as my evolving sense of understanding. But I did feel from my teenage years a strong call to ministry. And in the Baptist community, ordination is somewhat different than it is in other places. I didn't have to have specific vocational goals. So persons other than pastors could be ordained. And again, in this time in Baptist life, there was a great sense of growing acceptance. I'm talking now about the late 70s, growing acceptance of women and what women could do in the church. And so just as I was moving towards ordination, this is when Southern Baptists decided to split. A growing controversy of fundamentalists over against those that were named moderates. For a while, it didn't seem to affect local churches very much. This was something that happened on the national level. We would all learn very quickly, to our chagrin, that it would affect deeply everybody on the local level. But I was serving a church in downtown Louisville. It was the third congregation I had served as a minister of music. And the pastor and I talked about my sense of being called. And in that particular congregation, and every Baptist church had the capability of deciding their own way of ordaining. In that congregation, the invitation for ordination came from the deacons. And so they extended that invitation to me. I responded. I had to write a paper, which I probably spent more time on than most of my papers for seminary. My theology, my spiritual journey, and my philosophy of worship, or theology of worship. A committee was pulled together, some members from the church, some folks from the wider Baptist community in Louisville, and I was really very honored that Hugh McElrath and Don Husted were on my ordination council. And they asked the hardest questions too, I would just like to pose. Then when they approved my ordination, we planned the service. Both Hugh McElrath and Don Husted participated in my ordination, which has been a very important and dear memory for me, that they were there and that they supported my ordination. That was in 1985. But then things got worse in the convention, and pretty soon I determined that it was going to make things very hard for me to find a job. We moved to Birmingham, and there were lots of churches that called, being interested in my serving as minister of music or interim or supply, until the fact that I was ordained came up in the conversation, and then everything shut down pretty quickly. So I have tried to find a way to live out my calling however I can, and in whatever places I can. So,
wow, that's quite a story. I know you weren't the first woman to be ordained in the Baptist, among Baptists, but pretty early on, right?
It was fairly early. The very first Baptist, I think, was Baptist woman, was back in 1963 or something. Very, very, very early, but there wasn't. There was a sort of a groundswell of women wanting to be ordained until in the late 70s. It seemed to kind of gather energy and grow. And for most of us, it was a really hard decision, knowing that if I am ordained, many doors will close. If I'm not ordained, I probably could get a job in more places.
Right. That's really.
But what did we think was the most important way to approach it? And regrettably for Baptist, we lost quite a large percentage of my generation of women who were called to ministry. They went to the UCC, they became United Methodist, Presbyterians, where they could find a way to serve as they had been called.
Sure. I think that was during this period of your life too that you went on for doctoral studies. Is that right?
Yes. I found out about a doctoral program at the University of Louisville that was a joint degree with the University of Kentucky. And they had a program in musicology. So I was thinking that would be the best fit for me to do musicology. And I was able to get a fellowship that happened to be an interdisciplinary dean's fellowship. So during my first year, as I was casting about for what kind of project to do, Hugh McElrath, in his wisdom, said, "Have you considered shape note music?" And he suggested that I talk with Harry Eskew, whom I had met a few years earlier. And it seemed that this could be a project that would easily be interdisciplinary. I studied a group of singers in Western Kentucky, and I spent 7 years going to Western Kentucky and participating in the singing, doing oral history interviews. And so the final project was a combination of an oral history, some cultural anthropology, and performance practice. So that also sort of shaped a good deal of my future research and future writing in musicology. But I think the thing that I was most drawn to was not so much just the songs, although I do love those folk tunes that are in the Southern Harmony and Sacred Harp traditions. What I was most drawn to were the singers. How the music worked in them and what it meant, and how you could see their affection and their identity just come out as they were singing. And also realizing that the singing operated as a very strong kinship tie that drew these people together with very strong bonds. They may not have been blood relations, but they were family, and they were drawn to each other and supported one another through all kinds of things, not just singing. But it was the singing, the glue that held them together as a group.
That is so fascinating. You know, last month with Debbie Lou Ludolph, we were talking about music, not just music, it's more than something on a page. That's, you know, it's an event. You know, the page is only like a clue to the music. That the music is something that happens, not something that you look at, right? And your story just really, I think, illustrates that so vividly. Yeah. So you down in Birmingham sort of changed directions a little bit, though, right? Once you got down there.
Well, it was the old look for a job routine, and there weren't any musicology positions open. We ended up in Birmingham because when John Loftis and I each finished our doctoral work, we decided it was a foot race. Whoever got a job first, that's where we would go. And he got the job first. So we ended up in Birmingham, and I began looking around. No church jobs were opening up. By this time, being an ordained woman was a political hot potato nobody wanted to touch. So I began working in the library at Samford University. I had worked in the library at seminary, and so it was a comfortable thing to do. And I enjoyed it very much. No doubt about that. I enjoyed the library work. And as I began to realize there's probably not going to be a church job for me, there's probably not going to be a musicology job for me. What if I just look at library? And for that, I needed another degree. So began work on a Master of Library Services and commuted back and forth to Tuscaloosa. Took some classes at night in Birmingham, and I got a job just as I was finishing up degree stuff at the Birmingham Public Library in art and music. And there had been a job freeze. And I had talked with people in the department. They seemed to be very positive about wanting to hire me, but they couldn't. So they said, hurry up and finish your degree. So I was trying to do that. And then I got a call in August, And they said, we've just been given permission to hire. We want you to start. We need you to start right away. And we need you to start right away full time. And I said, but I have another semester full time at Tuscaloosa. And they said, we need you to start full time right away. So I said, okay. So for a few months, things were a little busy, but I enjoyed that work a lot, and made some very good friends in the library system there, and felt like in some degree my teaching was given an outlet. It's just that my students came one at a time, and I helped them with whatever music project they had to do. Fourth graders, some college students, some retired adults who just had a real yen to know more about various styles of music. So I had a good time in the library there.
Cool.
So that was one of the many left turns in the road for me, thinking I was going to do one thing and ended up doing another.
I guess you didn't expect you were going to end up teaching at seminary either, right?
I didn't. I'd always dreamed of it. Gosh, there was a group of us that would sit around while we were at seminary and say, if we ever started a seminary, this is what it would be like. And we would talk about it and, joke about it, and said we would form the faculty, and our seminary would be so good because we would solve all the problems that we had experienced in seminary.
Yeah.
As it turned out, Baptist Theological Seminary at Richmond was formed in the early 90s, an outgrowth of the fundamentalist movement of the Southern Baptist Convention and the struggles with the seminaries there over academic freedom, over what could and couldn't be taught. And John Loftis and I watched with great joy as this young seminary was formed, never thinking that we would actually have an opportunity to participate in it, but just to cheer them on from a distance. Then there was the accident that took John's life and our daughter Jessica in the fall of 1993. Following that, Bill Leonard, who had been John's major professor at Southern, who followed him to Samford on the religion faculty and then left to go start the divinity school at Wake Forest. Bill called and asked me, I don't know, a month or so after the funeral, if I would be okay with the idea of establishing a chair in John's name at Baptist Theological Seminary. And I thought that was a great idea. So we began to work on that. The outgrowth of that was that BTSR invited me to become a trustee, which I did, again, just laughing at how things, you never see it coming, right? So differently than what I expected, I became involved with BTSR. And as a faculty member, taught in their short term in the winter, taught some hymnology, taught some church music, and kept saying to them, we really need a program in church music. You're going to be training pastors, but where are we going to train church musicians? The same questions were being asked about religious education. And the outgrowth of that was that I drew up a plan at the faculty request, I drew up a plan of what a program would look like in music, still under the umbrella of an MDiv, but with a concentration in music. Mm-hmm. I borrowed on the ideas from Southeastern Baptist Seminary and some of those old musings from seminary days when we thought we could solve all the theological problems in education. And so I came back to them with a plan, and I said, go and hire somebody. You have me. I'm a trustee. You'll have two. After a few months, the president called and he said, the faculty wants to talk to you about the position. And I said, we've already had this conversation. You need to hire somebody different. And they said, well, I'm just conveying to you that the faculty wants to talk to you. So I went to talk with the faculty, and you know the end result of that. I ended up joining the faculty and taking on the church music program. Which was a joy. It was awfully hard work. I had a lot of scrambling to do to put together the courses and to go out and recruit some students and try to get things off the ground. But it was great fun, and I had fabulous students, many of whom are now good friends.
And many of whom have gone on to become deeply involved in the Hymn Society as well.
Yes, a few of them, yes. I wasn't quite as direct as Hugh McElrath. I taught hymnology, but I did encourage them to find out about the Hymn Society and to try to become a Lovelace scholar. And I was very pleased when some did. And one of my favorite moments was in Winston-Salem. And I got to introduce Hugh to two of his grand students who were there as Lovelace scholars. And so that was a great memory for me.
That's so cool. I mean, I think people who know you know the way that you engage people is in mentoring relationships. And you may not have as direct an approach as Hugh McElrath, but I think people will testify that you have a strong way of encouraging.
Well, I suppose I should bow to whatever they say, because they might have a different interpretation. What I thought was not as direct, maybe they thought was just as direct, but in a different way. But you can't help but encourage students towards things that you think are important.
Right.
And so
I guess that sort of leads to your becoming the executive director of the Hymn Society. It occurred to me, actually, as I was thinking about this interview today, that not only were you among the first women to be ordained in the Baptist tradition, but you also were the first woman to serve as executive director of the Hymn Society. And could you talk a little bit about how that all happened?
Well, I have a very treasured friendship spanning many decades with Paul Richardson. And while the two of us joke with each other a lot, I think we truly value each other's gifts and each other's perceptions. So there was a conference where Paul wanted to talk, and he said, have you considered applying to the Hymn Society when Carl retires? And this was before Carl had announced his retirement. And I said, well, Paul, that's sometime down the road, and I'm not an administrator. Besides, I have this job finally teaching at the seminary, and I have too much to do there. I'm not ready to put that down. And Paul accepted that answer, and we went on with other less serious avenues of conversation. Then the seminary experienced some deep financial difficulties. And 4 faculty members were terminated. All 4 were tenured, and I was one of them. I agreed to come back on a part-time basis and to teach hymnology and a church music class and direct the choir. But it was an unsettling time, and it was right about in there that Carl announced his retirement. And I thought, well, maybe Paul was right. Maybe I am ready to move from the seminary, and maybe I should consider this. Thought about it for quite a while. There was one other step, though, that happened in the middle. I can't pass over that. I got a phone call, I think in March. And to the best of my memory, it was David Eicher. And he said, would you be willing to have your name placed in nomination for president-elect? And I said, wow, I'm really flattered, but are you sure? I've never been on the executive committee. I've never really done anything other than index the hymn. And he said, we're sure. Would you allow it? And so I said, well, yes. So that was sort of in a pipeline. And then the seminary cut back in May. And I went to the first executive committee meeting in the fall, and excused myself from all discussion of the executive director position because I was still thinking, I'm probably going to go ahead and throw my hat in the ring for this. So I stepped aside during all of that, and then and I did apply, and oh my goodness. The interview process was, on the one hand, it was terrifying with the insightful questions that I was to try to answer. And on the other hand, it was exhilarating because there were so many exciting things to consider. And a part of the application process was to present a hymn festival, as you would do one. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, great. Who's going to be in on this interview? Mel Bringle and Adam Tice. Oh, oh boy. But I loved creating hymn festivals, and so went at it with all that I could muster. So I was thrilled when I got a call from Mel inviting me to be executive director. Again, terrifying and exhilarating at the same moment. And I thought, how am I going to do this? I have no idea how to proceed. And I thought about Tom Smith and the wonderful job that he did. I was a young graduate student, and he was so supportive of me, and he seemed to run the conferences like clockwork and was out doing publicity and building membership. And Carl Daw, oh my goodness, how could I possibly follow Carl Daw? So I did a great deal of careful thinking and called a couple of friends of mine who had decided to move from fundraising at Samford to create their own company. And I think many people in the society will remember the work of Hope Manifest with our fundraising campaign. Todd and Alan were friends of mine, and I asked them first for a favor. Can you come and teach me what I need to know to be an executive director? What do I need to work on? How do I get started? We sat around in my living room for a day or so, just talking about one topic and another and how to approach it and what kind of tools I thought I might need. And out of that, a little bit further on, back in 2011, we got in touch with Todd and Alan again to talk to them about how to help us get our board organized and have all of the things that we should have in place for the executive committee and how to do some fundraising. And that's another whole story.
Well, it is, but it's interesting because your time as executive director is certainly a period of immense transformation for the Hymn Society, and I think that story, the meeting of the board with Todd and Alan is sort of a watershed moment, wouldn't you say?
Oh, it was definitely. In our fall meeting in 2011, we met in Dallas. And we met in Dallas because it was a hub city for people to fly into. And we had a number of folks already in Dallas who were on the EC. It seemed like an easy place for everybody to get to. And we wouldn't have the expense of flying everybody to Winnipeg, which is where we would be going in the summer of 12. Mm-hmm. So rather than take everyone to Winnipeg for our fall meeting, we met in Dallas, and we invited Todd and Alan to come and give a presentation. They did, they presented things very well, but oh my, it surprised everybody in the room. And folks were overwhelmed. This was not what they had bargained for when they came on the EC, and didn't see themselves as fundraisers. And folks were overwhelmed. So we took a short break, came back, and I'm convinced that what came out of my mouth next was the guidance of the Holy Spirit. I didn't know I was going to say this. It just came out. I said, why don't we take a step back? Why don't we consider what it is we want to accomplish? Why do we need to raise this money? What outcomes would motivate us enough to really want to raise this much money? What if we spend a year thinking about our vision for the future? So when we get to Winnipeg, we will be 10 years away from our 100th birthday. Can we take a 10-year view? What do we want to be when we're 100? How are we going to have a sound financial footing for the next century? How can we have a clear vision for the society for the next century? So this group that had been overwhelmed got some energy about thinking this way. And we began making some plans, and we had some local gatherings. Eat, sing, dream. playing off the book title of a similar name, and got people in various locations to come together in small groups and dream together, sing a bit, eat a bit, dream together. The reports from all of those different groups came in over the next several months. We shared our dreams in Winnipeg. Everybody put their dreams in that hammock that was stretched between the two paper palm trees on the wall. Joanne Reynolds has more imagination that should be allowed for one person, and also more energy. And so all week, people would get those little plastic Hawaiian leis and put them around their neck if they had put something in the hammock. And it was a lot of fun to do that. People played along, and I think enjoyed sharing some of those dreams. And members of the executive committee sat up all night. I think it was Tuesday, putting this all together and grouping things into like areas of vision. And out of that, eventually came the idea that there must be some sort of hub to hold this all together. We have these, what ended up being 4 separate areas that we thought held the potential for our dreams. And yet we needed something to kind of coordinate it and keep it together and not just drifting off in 4 different directions. And out of that came the Center for Congregational Song. Again, I think this was inspiration beyond our own human abilities to imagine, because the center has turned out to be so much more than any of us thought at the beginning. And I just have to say how proud I am of Brian and his willingness to take this on when we couldn't tell him what it was. In fact, we turned to him to tell us what it was. And to take that on and grab it with both hands and just run with it was, I think, quite a brave thing to do.
And it's interesting to me that you sort of shepherded the EC and the whole society through this process of discerning that this was the direction that we needed to go. And during your time, Brian was hired to begin this. And I don't think he knew what it was really supposed to be either. I mean, it's just sort of learned by doing. And, he's, as you say, he's done an amazing job. But you actually stepped down before the center formally launched, right? It was in 17.
In 17. We actually had the opening thing in 16, right? Okay. Wasn't in the fall of 16?
Well, see, I'm not quite sure, but it does strike me that
it did actually start. But when we hired Brian full-time, I said, let me step back to part-time, and I'll take one hand off the wheel, and I can sort of practice stepping back and getting ready to retire. Because I had told them when I came on, that I would give them 5 years, the EC. I said, I promise you 5 years. You may decide sooner than that you've had enough, but I'll give you 5 years, and we'll see after that. So the 5 years came right in the middle of the fundraising campaign. And I said, well, I'm not going to leave in the middle of the campaign. So I kept stretching out when I was going to retire. So this was the compromise for me to kind of step back to part-time. And in a budgetary sense, that was helpful to the society. So I was still on until April, I think. sometime in the spring in 17. Didn't the center open in 16, or did it open in 17?
I thought it was 17, but I
17. I could, you know,
somebody in the chat may correct me on that one.
somebody can set us straight. Things kind of merged together. I know that opening was down in Dallas, and it was a fabulous experience. Again, so different than anything we could have imagined that it would be.
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary. Yeah. The whole movement towards creating the center, I think, has been a game changer for the Hymn Society, and just at so many levels. And for me, you know, kind of coming after this, it's just remarkable to me to be in touch with the vision and the risk taking and the chutzpah, you know, to try something so outside the box. It's really remarkable, and it's just opened so many doors for us, established so many relationships, expanded our vision, expanded our our diversity. It's been incredible. And,
as I said, it's done so much more than we imagined in our wildest dreams. Back in 2012, when we started talking about it. So I see that in the chat that Michael has confirmed it was 2017. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, indeed. Well, your leadership has certainly made a huge difference, I think, for all of us and for the society, and I'm so grateful for that. We're going to wrap up shortly, but I wanted to address a couple of questions that have come in. Bill Roberts actually has asked two. One was how he can buy your dissertation, and the other one is how has life changed for women in church and parachurch leadership since the difficult days of your early vocation?
The short answer is not much. There are certainly more women who are pastoring churches than back in the 80s. But it's still a hurdle. It's a hurdle to be considered. Just my experience working with young seminary graduates who are trying to get a job, just to get an interview, just to be considered. It's still really difficult, and women come under a lot of scrutiny. Questions are asked that would not be asked of a man, with regard to their call and how to balance that with family. So I would say we have seen some slight opening of the door, but it's still very difficult for many women who want to do ministry in a vocational way, mm-hmm. and who are simply stymied at every turn. Yeah. I've often said to people, if you want to hear a really, really good sermon, go and listen to a woman preach, because there are not any women preachers out there who just do this because they, it's a passing kind of thing for them. It's a job. No, they have felt the burn of the call so very deeply in their life to be able to sustain whatever difficulties and overcome them and become a pastor somewhere, that their sermons are deep and worth listening to.
That's been my experience too. I totally affirm what you're saying about preaching by women. Amazing. Well, we are going to, like I said, we're going to wrap up in a few minutes. Sarah Golsonos, could we please write a song together? I need you to use your words full time.
Sarah, dear friend. She came to the Hymn Society conference this summer in Washington, and that just opened a huge fountain of creativity for her. So we've been working together on writing some hymns and songs together.
Oh, cool. So I guess I'm wondering, is there anything that I didn't ask that you were hoping we would talk about today?
You've pretty well emptied my brain today. I just would want to say that throughout all the various meanderings of my career, the Hymn Society has been a constant. I joined up in 76 and have considered the Hymn Society sort of my professional home, as well as my lately, my spiritual home as well. All these years, I think Harry Askew asking me to index for the hymn back in 1979 was a huge thing, which kept me involved and in touch, even in the years when I couldn't come to conferences. So I'm grateful for this journey, and to have been able to lead the society in whatever capacities that I have was a huge and a deep honor.
Yeah, it's just as you talk about the Hymn Society being a sort of a home, family, and church for you, I think you also have done a lot to help others to find a place in the Hymn Society as well. And I'm grateful for your leadership. And I know I speak for everybody who's watching, and there's several comments in the chat sort of saying much of the same kind of thing. So thank you for that. One final question I do have is, what would be your fondest hope for the Hymn Society going forward?
I think my fondest hope would be that when I meet someone new and they say, well, what was your career? And I say, well, I was executive director of the Hymn Society, that their response would be, oh, I've heard about them. They're doing some really wonderful things. My minister, my musician from church goes to the conferences, and they always bring back wonderful things for us to sing. That would be wonderful.
Amen to that. I think all of us are going to kind of commit ourselves to that. So thank you, Deb. And thank you for this time. It's been really inspiring to us to tell your story and to reflect on the things that you've shared with us over the years. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everybody. It was good to be with you today. Thanks for being with us. And next month, we're going to be talking to Paul Richardson. So I hope you will join us again for that. Take care.